godless churches has played a major role in racist ideas. Many Americans don't want to talk about racism, but I'm here to talk about it. And let's start with the church. I'm not talking about the church that's led by Jesus. I'm talking about those churches that leave Jesus out. They go by their own agenda and their own ideas, but yet go under the banner of Christianity. So-called pastors with racist ideas that they use the church to promote their sin. The church has a complex and multifaceted role in the history of racism. And I know some of you don't want me to go down this road. I've heard some of you say that this isn't the gospel. Well, it goes to show how small-minded some of you are. Is not racism about hate? Let those who love the Lord hate evil, Psalm 97:10. And racism has many tentacles of lies, deceptions, and murder for people who are delusional to think that racism isn't teaching on biblical principles. So allow me to go down the list. 1. Segregation in churches. Historically, many churches in the United States were racially segregated. This segregation was both a reflection of and a contributor to broader societal racism. As of 2001, about 87% of Christian churches in the U.S. were composed entirely of either white or African American parishioners. 2. Support for slavery. In the pre-Civil War era, some church leaders and denominations supported slavery using biblical interpretations to justify the practice. This support helped to perpetuate the institution of slavery and the racial hierarchies it enforced. It's unfortunate that we have Christians who want to live their lives in a compromising state, whereas they refuse to acknowledge the fact that the Bible had been misused to keep a nation of people enslaved, raped, tortured, and murdered, and that they, for decades, been the beneficiaries of the heinous injustice spearheaded by unrighteousness, leaders masquerading as pastors. And 3, resistance to integration. Even after the abolition of slavery, many churches resisted integration. For example, during the civil rights movement, some white churches opposed desegregation and civil rights reforms, while others remained silent on the issue. Much like today, we have churches who will back leaders who speak what they want to hear while ignoring institutionalized policies that they as Christians definitely need, as long as it really doesn't affect or concern them because they live in a proverbial false Christian bubble. Number 4, positive role in civil rights. Now, on the other hand, black churches have often been centers of resistance against racism and hubs for civil rights activism. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. emerged from the black church using their platforms to advocate for justice and equality. And number 5, ongoing challenges. Today, the church continues to fight with issues of racism. Surveys show significant division in perceptions of racial issues between white and black Christians, indicating that there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of racial understanding, reconciliation, and justice within the church. These points highlight the dual role of the church in both perpetuating and combating racism throughout history. And while I'm thinking about it, how do you feel about the church's role in addressing these issues today? The issue of some white churches turning a deaf ear to racism is like drawing a line in the sand. And here are some more points to make. A lack of awareness in education. Many predominantly white churches may not fully understand the depth and impact of systemic racism. Without direct experience or education on these issues, it can be challenging for congregations to grasp the reality and urgency of racial injustice. Fear of controversy. Addressing racism can be seen as a politically charged topic. Church leaders might fear alienating members of their own congregation who hold differing views. This fear can lead to a reluctance to speak out strongly against racism, a fear that Christians should not have, for the word says we are not given the spirit of fear. But too many are stuck in the world's point of view and more concerned about the fear of being ostracized by others rather than having the fear of the Father. But again, has not the word said that we do not have the spirit of fear? Maybe some of you need a self-check by looking into the mirror and see where we stand as far as Christians. And then there's comfort and complacency. Some churches may prioritize maintaining a sense of comfort and unity within their community over addressing uncomfortable truths. This can result in a passive stance on issues like racism. And I've come to learn and find out that a passive Christian is a Christian who unwittingly sides with Satan. This type of Christian sees sin, knows sin, but does nothing because they want their stable world as they know it and don't want it to get rattled. What they fail to realize is that we're not here to live a tranquil life while fellow Christians are being persecuted. Overall, tranquility comes in the afterlife. And also theological and political conservatism. Many white churches are theologically and politically conservative. This conservatism can sometimes lead to a resistance to addressing social injustice issues, including racism, especially if they are perceived as aligning with more liberal political agendas. The bottom line is that there are pluses and minuses on both sides of the aisles, and we as Christians should not be pigeonholed and locked into one side. What we should do is gather as much information as possible on each candidate and vote accordingly to whose values stack up more as a Christian. And last, historical and cultural factors. Historical segregation and cultural norms within certain denominations can also play a role. These factors can create an environment where addressing racism is not seen as a priority. An example is the subject of abortion, whereas it's a constant mantra in most white conservative churches. And nothing's wrong with that, and speaking out against it is definitely on the side of righteousness. But these same people never speak against the ills of racism, and as a matter of fact, they see racism as a thing of the past and believe society has moved on from it. Churches like these will prioritize abortion, and many have maintained that stance and only that stance for decades. Church racism since America's inception has altered the minds of young black Americans into thinking it's a white man's religion. The perception of Christianity as a white man's religion has been influenced by historical and ongoing racism within the church. This perception can have several effects. 1, disconnection from faith. Many young African Americans feel disconnected from a religion that they perceive as having been used to justify oppression and discrimination. 2, search for identity. This disconnection often leads to a search for spiritual and cultural identity elsewhere, and sometimes in religions or spiritual practices that they feel are more inclusive and representative of their heritage. Now, an example of this is a generation's perception that the Muslim faith is more about them than the Christian faith. And then there's critical examination. It has also promoted a critical examination of Christianity's role in history and its teachings. This can lead to a deeper understanding and sometimes a reformation of personal beliefs. Also, community and activism. Despite these challenges, many black churches continue to play a crucial role in community and support activism, providing a space for empowerment and social justice efforts. Now, addressing these perceptions involves acknowledging past wrongs, promoting inclusivity, and ensuring that the church is a place where all feel welcomed and valued. But be aware of buzzwords or code words like inclusive, which really means making the homosexual agenda acceptable. So how do you think churches can be better at supporting young African Americans today? See, You know it's important for churches to engage in self-reflection and education to better understand and combat racism. We need open dialogue, education, and a commitment to justice to help bridge these gaps. Also, putting Jesus first, that should be a top priority. So, with that being said, check out part 2 next Sunday. So, like, share, and renew your mind. Enough said.